Hello, and welcome to Fountain Street Church. I am the Reverend Christopher Rowe. I use he, him pronouns, and I have the honor of serving as the acting senior minister in this beautiful cathedral of love and this magnificent temple of peace. Today is a very special day because it marks what we at Fountain Street call the beginning of our Summer Speaker Series. Each year, as the snow still covers the ground and as the cold wind grips the air, our devoted Religious Services Committee is already hard at work imagining and inviting and curating this special 20-plus-year-old series. This year, as we begin this season of worship with one another that is every bit as reverent as it is relaxed and every bit as inspiring as it is informal, I want to extend my deepest and sincerest gratitude to the Religious Services Committee, a small but dedicated and mighty group of folks who commit themselves to bring unique voices from both within and beyond the hallowed walls of this community. Thank you, Religious Services Committee, for your dedication to this ministry and to this church and for making this year's Summer Speaker Series possible, even when at times it felt like it was an unimaginable task given the variables that you were given. And to the rest of us, I invite all of us into a season of ministry that is relaxed, restful, and restorative as we are challenged, charged, and changed by the voices of our contemporaries and of our peers. May this Summer Speaker Series breathe all of these gifts into our lives, and may we enjoy this next season with one another. And so without further ado, Fountain Street Church presents the 2021 Summer Speaker Series. Welcome.
Good morning and welcome to Fountain Street Church. My name is the Reverend Greta Seidohl, and I use she, her pronouns. And it is my pleasure and my honor to welcome you here virtually to our Cathedral of Love and our Temple of Peace this morning for our service. Thank you for being with us. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on this life's journey, whatever you believe or don't believe, whatever the color of your skin and whatever language you speak, thank you for joining us. You are welcome here among us. It is a beautiful spring in which we find ourselves, and we are not only joined by our human siblings, but the tulips and the daffodils, the orioles and the chickadees and the robins are all among us, tweeting a welcome to spring. And so I welcome you into this space, your whole body, your whole soul, Here may you find resilience. May you find hope. May you find community. Our sacred space of worship this morning is co-created with Gary Eberle, who brings us a message this morning inspired by the book of Job and by the more than a year that we have shared impacted by COVID-19 and beyond. We are also grateful for the musical talents and wisdom of Philip Pletcher. I'm grateful to both of them for joining us this morning and to all of you. May it be a day filled with wisdom, with hope, resilience, and love. Thank you for being here.
Reading from the book of Job with images by the English artist-poet William Blake. Once in the land of Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man living among all the peoples of the East. His sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular custom. Now one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Hasathan also came with them. The Lord said to Hasathan, "Where have you come from?" And Hasathan answered the Lord, "Oh, from roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it." And then the Lord said to Hasathan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on the earth like him. He's blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." Satan replied, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything that he owns? You've blessed the work of his hands, so his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch your hand and strike everything he has. He will surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Hasathan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself, don't lay a finger." And then Hasathan went out from the presence of the Lord. Now one day, when Job and Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came in to Job and said the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put your servants to the sword, and I am the only one who escaped to tell you. And while he was still speaking, another messenger came, and he said, "The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came, and he said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put your servants to the sword, and I am the only one escaped to tell you." And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came, and he said, "Your sons and your daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 pillars of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are all dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." At this, Job got up, tore his robe, and shaved his head, and then he fell to the ground in worship and said, "Naked came I from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all of this, Job did not sin by charging God with any wrongdoing. On another day, the angels came to present themselves to the Lord, and Hasathan also came with them to present himself before them. And the Lord said to Hasathan, "And where have you been?" And Hasathan said, "Oh, from roaming about the earth here and there, going back and forth on it." And the Lord said to Hasathan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There's no one on earth like him. He's blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason." Hasathan replied, "Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he'll surely curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, he's in your hands, but you must spare his life." So Hasathan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. And then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped his sores with it as he sat among the ashes. His wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job replied, "You're talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" And in all of this, Job did not sin in what he said. When Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, and Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes, and they met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. But when they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep out loud, and they tore their robes, and they sprinkled dust on their head. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was. If I had to sum up the year 2020 in one word, I think I'd use the word biblical. Because the year 2020 seemed to bring us one disaster after another. It was like the book of Genesis and Exodus and Revelation all kind of wrapped into one. Of course, we had the plague of COVID-19 that has taken 3.5 million lives worldwide so far and is still rolling. We've lost almost 600,000 people to death to COVID in this year alone in the United States. In 2020, we had epic wildfires that swept the West and the Pacific Northwest that were so bad that the smoke and the ash from it came this far east, over 1,000 miles. In 2020, we had more named hurricanes than any other year on record. We had so many that we ran through the 26 letters of the English alphabet and had to dip into Greek alphabet in order to name them all. Last summer, we had a great amount of civil unrest on the left in the wake of the George Floyd killing. There were fires in our streets, and we ended the year with the January 6th assault on the Capitol and on our democracy. We Americans suffered during that year from a leadership that I think was as erratic and destructive as any of the Old Testament kings that we read about, who were the bad kings of Israel. And every time we turned on the news or we checked our phones, there was another head-spinning disaster with that kind of whipsaw effect that we either created ourselves or nature inflicted on us. It was like those 4 messengers that come to Job, one after another, bad news, bad news, bad news, as if the whole world had become Job. So the question today is, how can we maintain hope and optimism and faith? We were locked down during that year. We were isolated and cut off. We had difficulty even articulating what was going on. In September, in the New York Times, when the deaths in the United States from COVID were only at 300,000, a medical doctor, Amitha Kalachandran, put it succinctly in an article that was headlined, "How can we bear this much loss?" What do we do with all the suffering that we've experienced in the past year? How can we live through it and live out of it? So sometime last winter, as the snow was piling up here in Michigan and the days grew darker, as the deaths from COVID climbed past 500,000 in the United States alone, as the infection rates hit terrifying highs, and there were not yet any approved vaccines, my thoughts turned to the book of Job that was written over 2,500 years ago. It's one of the most challenging books in the Hebrew and Christian scripture. Its beginning is brutal in its directness, and that's what we just heard, the first 2 chapters. It's as brutal as a Grimm Brothers fairy tale. We encounter a God in that opening of the book who's almost casual about the amount of suffering inflicted on one of his most loyal followers, who makes a cruel bet with a character named Hasathan, whose name means the adversary, who's kind of like a prosecuting attorney, prodding God. He's an angel in the service of God who seems to wander the earth, kind of supervising things here, and who challenges God like an attorney. And as casually as all that is Job's perfect world, and everything in it is destroyed. There are 2 acts of pillage and murder by rival human tribes that destroy Job's flocks and his family. Since he's a nomad or a herder, losing all of his flocks means loss of all of his wealth. And then 2 acts of God, as insurance companies would call them, the lightning from the sky, a tornado that kills all of his children. Who can bear this much loss? Not Job. He first collapses in grief, but at least in this part of the story, he's the proverbial patient Job. He utters the almost unbelievable lines, "Naked came I from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord takes away. May the name of the Lord be praised." His wife, I think, is a character more like us. She's only got one line in the whole book, but it's memorable. Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die. She's angry, she's upset. But Job doesn't do either of those things. And then the three friends come. And then there's silence. It just ends in silence. 7 days and 7 nights of people sitting on the ash heap, absolutely stunned, dumbstruck by the amount of suffering they've endured. Now, those two chapters form the first movement of the book. They were originally written in prose by an unknown author, perhaps based on an old folktale, related to stories that may be 1,000 years older than that from Sumerian literature. And they show us the proverbial patient Job, the one who has the patience of Job. And if the book ended there with that resignation, I think we'd find Job a pretty useless character for our purposes. He's too saintly, even though we might be sympathetic with him. But luckily, another author at a later date picked up the story of Job and in wonderful poetry in Hebrew reveals to us another Job, one that we can relate to more fully as we come out of our own horrible year. Because the Job who appears after chapter 3 is an impatient Job, angry, argumentative. He's a Job who finally wants to take God to court and argue with him face to face and say to him, "What have I done to deserve this?" This is the Job I think we can all find inside of us after this past year, whether we believe in God or not. But this Job, more than the proverbial patient Job, is the one we can learn the most from. Because in the end, he's the one to whom God reveals himself. I think we've all had these Job moments in the past year. He curses the day he was born. May the day of my birth perish. That day may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine upon it. This is the voice of despair, the feeling that is one we can relate to better than the more pious the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. At some point in the past year, who hasn't asked with Job, why didn't I just perish as I came from the womb? He's in misery, he's wild, crazy with grief and confusion. We could relate to these lines. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, only turmoil. And then, as the book of Job goes on, the three friends rise up. To me, it's kind of like the voices on cable TV. They're trying to make sense of this. They argue, they accuse, they rehash things over and over again from the book of Proverbs and the book of Psalms, accusing Job of having sinned. Because he's suffering, he must have sinned. Eliphaz says, shouldn't your piety be confidence and you blameless your ways of hope? Those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. Bad things are happening to you, Job, so what have you done? Repent it, and all will be well. God will forgive you. God will restore you. So it's a lot of cliches they throw at him of conventional belief, and he refuses to accept it. He just rejects their pap. He won't be satisfied with the conventional wisdom. Now, this is the worst stage of his grief. He still wishes God would just crush him and strike him dead. And he challenges the friends to show him what he's done to deserve all that's happened to him. Like us, he's asking, how does all of this make sense? And so he turns and he addresses God directly and angrily. Why have you made me your target? He demands his day in court. Show me what I've done. Let me plead my case. I will give free rein to my complaint. I'll speak out of the bitterness of my soul. I say to God, do not declare me guilty. Tell me what charges you have against me. He's shocked by what's happened to him, deeply shocked. He's shocked also by all the inequity he sees in the world, all the moral chaos he sees in the world. People who are clearly unjust and immoral rise to positions of wealth and power as if they were blessed, and then people like himself, he sees stricken with disease and poverty. The tents of the marauders, he says, are not disturbed, and those who provoke God are secure. And so Job wants to talk to whoever's in charge of the universe. Because whatever else, he wants to believe that there's some kind of sense to this. There's some kind of order, however obscure it is. All he wants from creation and the Creator is an explanation. Though he slay me, yet I will hope in him, says Job. I will defend my ways to his face. I know I'll be vindicated. Like us, in the past year, Job is lost in the universe. He wants to confront God. He wants to confront the source of it all. He wants to understand the source of his suffering and of the world's unfairness. But he doesn't know where to turn. God in this book becomes the Deus absconditus, the God who has absconded, who's disappeared. Job's in the position of we modern folks whose belief in a supreme being is shaky at best. And he cries out in despair, if I only knew where to find him. I'd go to his dwelling. I'd state my case before him. I'd fill my mouth with arguments. I would find out what he would answer me and consider what he'd say to me. But if I go east, he's not there. If I go west, I don't find him. When he's at work in the north, I don't see him. When he turns to the south, I can't catch a glimpse of him. Now, after many more chapters of wrangling back and forth between the three comforters now turned attackers and Job, a fourth voice enters the scene, a young student type named Elihu, who seems to have all the answers, but his words don't mean anything. And then, suddenly, the voice of God, a different sounding God, interrupts Elihu and just comes out of a whirlwind. So God, who's been silent since chapter 2, apparently can't take our human wrangling anymore. And without any introduction, a whirlwind surrounds Job, and out of it comes this magnificent voice of some of what I think is the best poetry ever written by human beings. And somehow this voice is an answer to Job's questions about his sufferings. But at first glance, it doesn't even seem to address the question that Job asked. Cynthia Ozick, the great contemporary Jewish writer, writes in an excellent essay on the book of Job. She says, quote, "What comes crashing and tumbling out of that whirlwind is an exuberant ode to the elements, to the fecundity of nature, the sea, the stars, the rain and the dew, the constellations in all their courses, the lightning, the lion, the raven, the ass, the goat, the ostrich, the horse, the hawk, an infinitude of joy, an infinitude of love, even for the ugly hippopotamus, even for the crocodile with his terrifying teeth, even for the creatures made mythical through ancient lore." Somehow, the poet, whoever this unknown poet was, seems to channel the voice of the universe, of the creative power of the universe. And what the voice says shocks us. It's disturbing. It's profoundly unsettling. And when I read it or recite it aloud, I think of some of the images of deep space that come out of the Hubble telescope. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off the earth's dimensions? Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its foundations while the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy? And this voice from the whirlwind challenges Job and us to take a cosmic perspective in the midst of all of our suffering, to imagine the limits of the universe, and to imagine the limits of our own ability to understand the universe. The voice says, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead the great bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? This voice conjures us to think of all the things we humans don't control, all the wild, the untamable places of the earth, all the animals that refuse to be domesticated by us, who live in the wildest places of the planet that we may not even know about. Where do the mountain goats give birth? Who let the wild donkeys go free? Could a human being create a creature as unlikely as an ostrich, which flaps its wings, the book tells us, joyfully? In fact, many of the wild creatures in the 2 chapters of this book actually laugh at the human world while Job sits on his ash heap in sorrow. The wild donkey, quote, laughs at the commotion in town as it ranges the hills for its pasture and searches for any green thing. The voice asks Job to think of the wild birds. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle soar at your command and build its nest on high? And at the end of this first speech by the voice of God, Job is struck dumb. I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. And this amazing voice continues, asking us to look at the truly wild and extravagant parts of creation over which we have no control. The great beast, Behemoth, in all its beastliness, what strength it has in its loins, what power in the muscles of its belly. Its tail sways like a great cedar tree. Its bones are like tubes of bronze, its limbs like rods of iron. And then the voice conjures up the monster Leviathan. Can you, human being, put Leviathan, pull him in with a fishhook, or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you make a pet of it like a bird, or put it on a leash for the young women of your house? Now, some people read these lines as God bullying Job into submission. But I prefer to understand this magnificent poetry as the universe's attempt to knock Job out of his self-centeredness. On the great scale of the universe, even after 2020, our human sorrows are only a tiny, tiny portion of the constant cycle of creation and destruction that's so vast in scale across the universe, all we can do is lower our heads in awe. And this is what Job does. He opens his mouth again and says, I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Now, these lines have been interpreted and reinterpreted over the last 2,500 years, but I don't believe that Job is repenting of any sin he committed, because he didn't. And he would argue that with God. So what is he repenting of? I think he repents that until he heard that voice, the voice of the universe, speaking out of the whirlwind, he didn't really see that the universe is not about him. It's not about his suffering. I think each of us is built, it's just the way we're put together, to think that my problems are the problems of the whole universe. My problems fill all of creation. That our human problems, many of which we inflicted on ourselves, are the sum of all the problems of the world. But if you've ever suffered great grief, great personal loss, and survived it, you know that life has a way of going on, regardless of us. The wild goat in the mountain does not stop exulting because of our losses. The constellations don't change their courses because we had a bad year. What Job learns here is not repentance. An alternate translation to that line, I repent in dust and ashes, is I know that I am dust and ashes. That is, he learns humility in the face of the universe. Humility is a word derived from the Latin humus, or earth. And it means an understanding that no matter how great our pain and loss, life, with a capital L, goes on, surrounding us with mystery. We live, we suffer, we die, we grieve, we try to make sense of it, and then, along with life, we go on in a universe that's constantly destroying and creating itself over and over and over. And we can only be humble and admit that we, like the stars, are both dust and stardust. Now, we can't prove that the universe makes sense or that it's just. So we are in the position of having to make an act of faith and live as if the universe and our place in it is right and just. And the option, it seems to me, after having lived through this past year, is despair, madness, living in a world that's chaotic and has no meaning. In spite of all he suffers, Job's integrity is the only way he can survive. His only recourse is acceptance of his suffering and humility and simply affirming, I don't understand, but I believe. If I must live without understanding, but I will live in faith and not in despair. This is what I believe the Kierkegaardian leap of faith is. It's a leap over the gulf of not understanding things. It's a leap to an absurd affirmation of goodness. The goodness of the universe, the goodness of human life, in spite of everything. This theophany of Job, the voice from the whirlwind, demonstrates we cannot fully understand. It takes us to places outside our human categories and even beyond categories. So 2020 was a horrible year. We're not the first ones to suffer. Elie Wiesel, who suffered and survived the horrors of Buchenwald, who lost most of his family in the horrors of the concentration camp, came out to devote his life to the cause of suffering peoples worldwide. And he said the following in his 1986 Nobel Peace Address: Job is our ancestor, Job our contemporary. His ordeal concerns all humanity. He demonstrates that faith is essential to rebellion, and hope is possible beyond despair. Because I remember, I despair. Because I remember, I have hope. So let us remember Job, who, having lost everything, still found strength to begin again, to rebuild his life. Job was determined not to repudiate the creation, however imperfect, that God had entrusted to him. As we leave this horrible year of disease and war and natural disasters and man-made disasters, can we emerge with a faith in resilience? The resilience of the earth, the resilience of the human species, the resilience of our individual selves to bring ourselves back. I noticed this spring that somebody forgot to tell the Forsythia that 2020 was the worst year ever. And somebody forgot to tell the tulips, too. They didn't notice. They bloomed, as did the rest of the world. The orioles came back in spite of our suffering. So did the herons, oblivious of all that you and I had been through. There are rhythms of life bigger than ours. Nothing's going to restore what we lost in 2020, the friends, the relatives, the faith in our institutions. There'll always be a hole there, but there can come new life out of the tragedies that we suffered. Like recovery from surgery, there are going to be scars and scar tissue. It'll remain sensitive for a long time. But after the hurricanes, people come out, the landscape is strewn with rubble, they pick up the pieces one by one, they go on. And that's what we'll do. We'll go on. Here at Fountain Street Church, there's a beautiful hall of remembrance. And this is Memorial Day weekend, so we remember. The hall is the official city memorial to the citizens who died in World War I 100 years ago. That cataclysmic war to end all wars didn't end all wars, of course, not nearly. But the people who survived that horrible war, the worst in human history, followed by the influenza pandemic the following year, found meaning in their suffering. They acknowledged their grief, and they built a beautiful monument to it so they could both remember and move on. When we're finally allowed back into our beautiful church building again, when the pandemic finally ebbs, it would be a good place for us to go, sit, pause, reflect. Reflect with Job on life, death, grief, remembrance, suffering, and recovery. And it would be a good place to remember that it was Job's acceptance of all of life's suffering that finally allowed him to accept his place in this vast, beautiful, immortal, and ultimately mysterious universe. So may it be.
I'm grateful to Gary for both his challenge and his comfort. And I am resonating with the words he used for part of Job. I don't understand, but I must believe. If I must live without understanding. But I will live in faith and not in despair. I will live in faith and not in despair. I invite you to live in faith today, to give to this community financially as an act of faith, and as a resistance to despair that the world might have us cave into. Give in faith. Rebut despair and come into community. Support this community so that we might live into the years to come together. This is the offering, and your gifts are gratefully received. Beloveds, friends, community members, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for having hope, for taking a leap of faith together with us. As you go into your week, as you go into the summer, may you know that it is possible to emerge with a faith in resilience, to emerge with a faith of resilience, that it will find you and meet you and carry us forward. May the daffodils and the forest scents, may the orioles and the robins remind you of the resilience in this world. Greet you with each day in the grief and in the joy, so that we might move forward into whatever comes next, stronger together. Blessed be. Have a beautiful week. Thank you for being with us.